Hey guys, we're your hosts. I'm Jess,
And I'm Fenella.
and this is Cosy Crime Club. Each episode, we explore real cases, from the eerie to the outrageous, with curiosity, empathy, and just the right amount of dark humour. So pour yourself a big mug of something warm, tea, coffee, or maybe something a little stronger, grab a blanket, and settle in. Welcome to the club. Hey guys, welcome back.
It's a really cozy night for us tonight here in Victoria. It's raining.
It is. It is. All day it's been so dreary, and I was thinking, knowing that we were going to record tonight, I was like, this is perfect.
Absolutely
This is,
perfect.
rain on the window, very cozy, perfect for a bit of crime.
Perfect for a bit of crime.
Wait, hang on. When I say a perfect for a bit of crime, I mean for listening to crime, not committing crime. So club members.
I second that.
Yeah, don't commit anything. Now, Fenella, you're bringing your case to us today. What do we have?
I am indeed. So tonight's case takes us across the seas to Europe, where we land on the shores of Alicante, Spain in 1998. Just before we dive in, I did just want to share that I felt compelled to bring this case to the club because it really reflects the tenacity of a mother's love. There will, however, be the discussions of harm against a child. And if you're listening and thinking you'd rather give this one a miss, click away now. Alicante is a province famous for its nightlife, excellent restaurants, and coastal lifestyle. With its Mediterranean climate, it's mostly warm all year round. Its coldest month is January, the last pocket of true winter, when the temperatures can drop to around 12 degrees Celsius. And for this reason, it's a popular holiday destination among Europeans. I was poring over photos of the area while researching this case because it truly is beautiful and just has such character. There's colourful buildings nestled up into the land and amazing ocean views. Imagine cobblestone streets that open suddenly into a beach full of umbrellas, balconies hanging with laundry, pastel houses climbing the hillsides towards the sky. Tourists come for the sun and sangria, but the locals live inside this rhythm all year round.
When are we going?
I know, right?
Yeah.
Tomorrow. Pack your bags.
I'm done. It's done.
Now, just zooming into a small town called Benejuzar. The population at the time, just a few thousand. The kind of place where it seems like everyone knows everyone else. A real community. It's an old Catholic town which boasts a historical church built in 1611 named Virgen del Rosario. Set inland, Benejuzar is an agricultural area, but it's not far from the coastline. In the 90s, life is vibrant. The residents of Benejuzar and the world are barreling towards the turn of the millennium. There's an overall sense of optimism and anticipation in the air, nearly the world over. People are generally feeling excited about the future and joyful about the present. Young girls and boys are dreaming big dreams, making plans. Teenagers are hanging out with their friends, largely unsupervised because, well, it's the 90s, and that's the normal thing to do. There's a sense of freedom and autonomy, especially in a small Catholic town like Benejuzar, where parents expect their children to be safe. However, there is always risk. And one day in October 1998, Veronica Garcia came face to face with this risk. Just 13 years old in 1998, Veronica lived with her mother, Maria del Carmen Garcia. There was no reliable mention of a father or husband in the reports I dug into, so I imagine that Maria was a single mother, but either way, they seemed to live quite normal lives. Their time was occupied with school, work, and social activities. Veronica had a slim build, medium-length brown hair, fair skin, and hazel eyes. She and her mother Maria had a neighbor named Antonio. He was around 63 years old, 50 years Veronica's senior. Veronica and her mother Maria knew Antonio well enough to be called familiar with each other. And Antonio wasn't just known to the Garcias as their neighbor. He was known to the neighborhood at large. Some people referred to him by the nickname Pincholito, which means little brush in Spanish. I found out that it can actually be used to describe someone with creative tendencies, for example, painters. So little brush for a painter. Antonio was a well-known figure in town. One day, when Veronica was home alone waiting for her mother Maria to return from work, it was a normal day like any other. Yet, unbeknownst to either of them, Antonio had noticed Maria wasn't home. And in any other circumstances, this might be reassuring. the elderly neighbour keeping a watch on the house and kids while mum is out. But terrifyingly, this neighbour's intentions were much more sinister. Seeing his opportunity, Antonio made his way over to the Garcia residence and began chatting to Veronica. And I just want to mention here that actually I did find some discrepancies in the reporting on this. Either that Antonio visited Veronica at the house she and her mother shared, or that he actually followed her when she went out alone for a walk. But either way, like a good neighbor, they crossed paths and Veronica began chatting to Antonio. She trusted him in the way that you would trust any elderly neighbor. And besides, Benejuzar is a Catholic town where tradition and respect for your elders is an unspoken expectation. So Veronica had no way to know the danger she was in. Sometime later, once Antonio was satisfied that he had Veronica's attention and that they were certainly alone, he pulled out a knife. Terrified, Veronica's eyes widened in fear. He threatened her with bodily harm or death unless she cooperated with him. Out of self-preservation, Veronica obeyed, and Antonio SA'd her at knife point. Fortunately, though, a smart and intuitive girl, Veronica kept her wits about her and avoided doing anything that would give Antonio a reason to harm her further. And after some time, Antonio seemed to have gotten what he wanted, and he left. When Maria returned home, she found Veronica in great distress. Veronica opened up to her mom about what had happened, and Maria, like any mother would be, was absolutely horrified at what had taken place. She was also racked with guilt that she hadn't been there to protect her daughter from this awful predator. Maria's faith in community safety was shattered, but she knew she could never let Antonio get away with it. She accompanied Veronica to report Antonio to the police and begin criminal proceedings against him, hoping to see him punished for his crimes sooner than later. Not just for Veronica's sake, but to remove him from the community and make it a safer place for everyone overall. After making their police report, officers located Antonio and he was taken into custody. Meanwhile, rumors began to spread around town. Whispers that Antonio had taken advantage of Veronica, and more whispers that the whole thing was fabricated. Locals found it difficult to imagine their Pincholito as having committed such a horrific crime. Furthermore, some wondered if a crime had taken place at all. The attitude at that time being somewhat different to that of today, where there's so much awareness and conversation these days around consent, as well as the difference between minors and adults. But in the late 90s, this conversation wasn't being had. This meant that there was a lot more blurring of lines, which in today's world would be totally rejected by most. Police proceedings were extended and dragged out. Maria found it difficult to gain traction when it seemed everyone's minds were already made up.
So, just as a general consensus, the town had good feelings about him. Like, this was was really hard for them to believe what had happened. So I just wanted to confirm, like, the town were like, no way would he do this. Is that like the vibe?
Well, I don't know if they were like, no way would he do this. I don't know if that's what everyone thought. But yes, they didn't believe that it happened. And so Maria was in a terrible position. Her daughter was being vilified as the perpetrator of lies against Antonio, yet he was the offender. And this period of time was very dark for both Maria and Veronica. Maria was alone in supporting her daughter through an excruciating moment and the accompanying fallout. Just think about it. At 13, emotions are already heavy, erratic, unmanageable, and then add to that the horrific trauma that she's experienced. Plus, on top of that, she's facing disbelief from those closest to her neighbors and community. That's the one thing I feel that you hope that you can count on when things are going wrong for you, when you're in a time of need. And to have them turn their backs, like, I actually can't even imagine what that must have felt like on top of what they were dealing with. And in a small town like Benejuzar, you can't escape it. Maria did everything she could to support her daughter through this time, while still focusing her efforts on ensuring justice would be served. Facing an uphill battle on all fronts, she charged forward. She was not going to be defeated by outside noise. She was not going to be beaten by legal delays and roadblocks. A nearly 2-year legal process commenced, during which Maria's mental health suffered greatly. 2 years of doubts, whispers, taunts, and distrust within her community. But Maria and her daughter Veronica persevered in pursuit of justice. Eventually, in the year 2000, aged 65, Antonio was finally tried and he was found guilty of the assault, resulting in a 9-year prison sentence. Finally, Maria could look her daughter, now 15 years old, in the eyes and say, "It's over." But while the court ordeal was over, that did not mean it was behind them. Now it was a time for healing for both Veronica and her mother. And as the days, months, and years went on, the family unit fell back into routines and created new ones. Time passed, and the trauma of 1998 receded somewhat for the Garcias. Not enough, but enough to get by. 4 summers passed with Antonio behind bars. One day, in June 2005, the 5th summer, Maria, still living in Benejuzar, decided to head out for a bit. She got herself dressed and ready, then stepped out into the early summer air and made her way to the nearby bus stop. While she was waiting for her bus to turn up, she noticed a man in her peripheral vision. All of a sudden, Antonio Cosme greeted her. Yeah, I know.
What? Oh my god, okay.
Yeah. So we're in 2005. In 2000, he was sentenced to 9 years in prison. So it's only been 5 years.
Right. And 2005, he would have been about 70, right? Whew, holy moly. What is Maria even thinking at this moment?
Yeah. He was out on day release from prison, and this was the first time Maria had come face to face with him since his sentencing. Understandably, she was in absolute shock. She hadn't expected to see him. She hadn't even known that he was on day release. Nobody had called her from the prison or via the courts to notify her or Veronica, his victim, that he was being provided day release, a shocking oversight by the legal system. To think that someone convicted of such a crime can just turn back up in the same place with no notice to the victims is just horrific. When also he's not free, like he's still serving his sentence at this point. So it's not like he's been released and he's free to do what he wants now. He's just on day release. So to me, that's shocking. I don't know how you feel about that, but
I think that's so wild because it's a small town. And is the prison located in that town as well? Or is it like...
I believe it is.
Well, I guess if he's on day release, it can't be too far
it's not,
from the town.
Definitely
either
not.
in the town or near it. And to just think that he's allowed out of prison in this tiny town, that's so unbelievable.
I've never even thought about it before until this case. I was like, wait a minute, like, that's crazy. People just go out on day release.
Even just the thought of day release.
Just the concept of it. I'm like... I've heard it so many times, but I've just never really thought about it.
It makes sense if it's, I guess, depending on the crime, just making sure that they can, I guess, filter back into the community life.
Yeah,
but you think more like white-collar crimes, not something that was, abuse of a minor. That
exactly.
And aggravated. He had a knife. And he was found guilty, so it's not like they were like, oh, we still don't know if he did it. Like, he was found guilty, and this is nuts.
So Maria, of course, was frozen in shock and fear. But even more unbelievably than what we've just discussed with Antonio turning up out of nowhere with no warning, is that he approached Maria directly and greeted her.
The audacity. What?
Yeah.
Just like, hey, Maria. That's like psychological torture. That's...
Yeah. It's intimidating.
Yeah. Wow. This guy.
She did her best to maintain her composure, hoping that he would turn and walk away soon, but Antonio couldn't bear to be ignored. He pressed Maria again, taunting her. "How's your daughter?" he sneered. And that was enough. Something inside Maria snapped. Antonio had just sealed his own fate. Totally unaware of the bet that he had just hedged, Antonio sauntered away to a nearby bar that Maria's family would often frequent. She noticed this, and it disgusted her. Like it wasn't enough for him to approach her, taunt her, and sneer at the thought of her and her daughter's suffering. He wanted everyone to know about it too. To know that he was out, that he was back, the Garcias hadn't won. As if there's anything to be won in a situation like this anyway. Knowing where to find Antonio at the bar, Maria abandoned her original plans for the day. She left the bus stop and made her way to a nearby petrol station, where she purchased a container of petrol. Carrying the petrol container all the way to the bar, Maria stepped inside. Once she got through the doors, she looked around the crowded space until her eyes found Antonio. The hunter had now become the prey. Walking up to him, Maria emptied the fuel canister all over Antonio. Then she set him alight right there in the bar.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
We don't condone violence here, but go on.
She then turned around and left the bar, leaving chaos to unfold behind her. Of course, this caused utter commotion. Paramedics were rushed to the scene with reports of a man being set on fire, and soon Antonio was in the hospital. Following emergency treatment at the hospital, it was found that he had suffered burns to 90% of his body. Which is a lot, 90%. Like, she poured that can.
That is a lot. And he must have, well, I guess, I was going to say he must have been on fire for like quite a long time.
If you think about it, it's petrol.
Google says to put out a petrol fire, which is a Class B fire, use foam, dry powder, or carbon dioxide fire extinguisher, which I think is a normal fire extinguisher, actually. It says never use water. So even if like he was alight for, a small period, I feel like because it was petrol, like, started with petrol, that it's going to do a lot of damage. So would make sense why there was 90%. Did you say 90% of his body was burned?
90%, yeah.
Did she just walk away?
Maria had disappeared. She'd fled the bar, but she hadn't returned home. Eventually, she was found later that same night by police walking about the port of Alicante. So again, they were in Benejuzar, and the port of Alicante is about 20-minute drive or so away. So she may have caught a bus. I'm not 100% clear on that, but she was pacing back and forth around the port, and that's where she was found by police. Now, Maria understood that what she'd done was wrong, and so she outrightly confessed to her crime, explaining her intentions had just been to scare Antonio, to stop him thinking that it was okay to taunt her or her family, and as payback to give him a small taste of the horror that he'd inflicted on her daughter. Maria was open about not only what she had done, but also how and why she did it. And I get the sense from this that she felt relieved to speak about what had happened, and that she was probably in shock at the time she was being questioned by police and was just letting it all out as well. About 10 days later, Antonio succumbed to his burns, despite best efforts of the hospital staff to save his life. What had started out with a jeering hello had ended in a fiery farewell, and Maria's revenge had just turned into a murder case. Because Maria hadn't attempted to cover up her crime, there had been no need for specific detective work or investigation into the crime and motive itself. Even if she had acted with intent to murder, there was no cause for the police to press the issue. She'd given them the information they wanted and needed. She was also not considered a flight risk, and so she was granted bail while awaiting trial. This was a huge relief, not only to Maria but to Veronica too. Can you just imagine, the whole time I was researching this, I was just thinking, how would Veronica feel during this time? Thinking this whole matter could have been put behind her and working for years to have a sense of normalcy, only to find her mother now facing criminal charges against her. First of all, so relieved and grateful to her mother, knowing that Antonia had been on day release and could have come to find her, or just anything could have happened, just normal fears that you would have. And just being so relieved that that fear was now removed forever. They don't have to keep looking over their shoulders. But then on the other hand, her mom is now a killer. So there's a lot to process with that one.
There is. And I feel like, who's to say she even had, anyone could even process what happened to her at such a young age and such a vulnerable age. I feel like you mentioned earlier when she was 13, and that's the whole transition into, that next phase of your life. So
yeah, she's around 20 now because she was 13 in 1998 and now 2005. She's older and all of that, but that was her formative years, as you were saying. So it's that would shape, your development in such a way. And then I feel like 20 is a whole other milestone because now you're really getting into adulthood, and then this happens. So it's just like all these traumatic events that are occurring
at these
very
important
difficult
stages.
Yeah, exactly. While Veronica would have felt this mixed bag of emotions, the community reaction to Maria's bail conditions following Antonio's murder was overwhelmingly negative. The people of Benejuzar did not want Maria to be released on bail. They wanted her to be locked up for her crime and without delay.
What? It's not, but it's not like what she did is something that you would just do to any random person. This is clearly, motivated by, like, as in for her, she felt provoked by him, but she wouldn't go do this to, like, the random butcher downtown. She's doing it clearly to this one person. What? What's wrong with this town?
Bearing in mind that these are the same people who believed Antonio was innocent of harming Veronica in the first place, on one hand, it's kind of maybe understandable that they would be wanting to reject her bail because in their eyes, he was innocent. But, I don't know. I don't know if I agree with that because he was convicted and he was in prison. Like, he was found guilty.
Do you know in your research whether the town, it was a vast amount of people that believed that he was innocent, or was it just like a 10%?
Well, the local reaction was so strong that the following year, in 2006, 400 residents of Benejuzar actually formed a protest in the streets. So there's only a few thousand people that live there, and that's going to be elderly people, children, and 400 protest age people gathered in the streets. They were like, lock her up.
Wow, that's a pretty big portion. Yeah, for a small town, that's a pretty huge portion. Yes, I guess if they believed that he was innocent to begin with. But like you said, I really struggle with that because you've been proven guilty.
And no one wanted their Pincholito to be locked up or to admit that he might have committed this crime.
I suppose the crime itself, especially if the town hadn't experienced that type of thing before, that would be a really hard thing to believe. And if you believe it, then you've got to say, okay, it happened. And then everyone in the town has to then deal with those emotions attached to that too. So it might be easier for them just to go, no, it didn't happen, because they just don't want to deal with how difficult that is. Was there ever anyone else who, like in your research, was there ever any other allegations?
I couldn't find anything else like that, which isn't to say, though, that it didn't happen. Just taking a moment there to reflect on all of that. Maria is just not having a good time. Her community is betraying her again. And this time, Antonio's innocence was not up for debate. No matter what people might have thought, he had been convicted of the crime that Veronica accused him of, and still the community were not on her side. Now, it's a terrible thing to happen, feeling that the world is against you no matter what you're experiencing. Just feeling like nobody actually has your back. It just really echoes the small town mentality, where whispers and ideals hold sway over cold, hard fact. Following her confession, Maria was processed through the courts where she entered a plea of insanity. For anyone who doesn't know, to plead insanity seems to be quite a common fallback option when there really is no defense, and there could be an argument made that sometimes it's used just for the sake of it, because the only other choice is to accept full responsibility, and full responsibility means full consequences. But in Maria's case, it's no excuse for her actions, but they do seem to have been the actions of someone who's had a sudden snap, a loss of control, loss of reason, and she was already suffering for years prior to this moment, feeling like a pariah in her own town, worried about her daughter and if she was doing enough or doing the right things to help her move through her trauma. As a loving mother, she carried the weight of Veronica's ordeal, as well as her own guilt and horror at the fact that it even occurred. We can empathize with her uniquely difficult situation. I also wondered when I was researching it is if any of this would have happened if he hadn't actually approached her at all.
With the plea of insanity, I fully agreed. Also, she wasn't like carrying a petrol can with her. She had to she had to go to a petrol station and get it.
But you could do that in a state of psychosis, right?
Could you?
I feel you could.
I haven't been in a state of psychosis. I don't know. You're like, haven't you? We all do. What I'm getting stuck on is that because she's pleading insanity. I think what I'm getting stuck on maybe it's just like it wasn't self-defense.
From what she said, she didn't intend to kill him, and like he didn't just die. You know, she wanted to scare him and scar him. Initially, she wasn't actually facing a murder charge. Not that that again minimizes anything that she's done or that's happened here, but just pointing it out because it's not so much a premeditated thing. When it comes to Maria, it took 4 years for an outcome. In 2009, Maria was sentenced to 9.5 years in prison. And although this was later amended to 5.5 years on appeal, I just want to say that when I first heard about the sentencing, I was actually taken a bit aback, thinking, okay, well, Antonio got 9 years for the initial crime. And then Maria got 9.5 years. Just a slightly longer sentence for a more severe crime. So because this caught my attention, I actually looked into more of the Spanish legal system. I found that in general, the charges for sexual assault and murder can actually be quite similar in Spain. Sexual assault can bear a sentence of anywhere between 4 and 15 years, depending on the details of the crime itself. And murder ranges from 10 to 15 years generally. So what this tells us about Antonio is that he actually received quite a high sentence for his crime. He got 9 years when he could have just got 4 years. And Maria actually received 9.5 years initially, compared to what could have been up to 15. Plus, Maria's sentence was appealed and then reduced to 5.5 years later on. That kind of made me think that the court system, or just the people investigating in general, really were leaning towards supporting Maria. Not her actions as such, but maybe empathetic or sympathetic to how they had come about in comparison to when they were sentencing Antonio.
Yeah, I suppose she had motivation. You can understand maybe where she's come from, but his motivations have no understanding if you're abusing a minor or anyone.
Yeah,
sexually abusing anyone. But
which
yeah.
I also found interesting in contrast to the fact that the local community, though, was so against Maria before she'd even done anything wrong, because in their mind, just reporting Antonio for his offending was enough of a crime. Once Maria was jailed, though, the tides began to turn. Where she had once battled against her local community to be heard, believed, and supported, now that the case had developed and gained national interest, Maria found herself with widespread supporters. The country was outraged at Maria being punished by the law for her revenge against her daughter's attacker. This spurred the country into action. There were petitions with thousands of signatures in appeal of her sentence, and even an appeal for Maria to be included in the Easter clemency. And for anyone like me who did not know what the Easter clemency was, it's a Spanish tradition that's been held since the 18th century, where a prisoner can be put forward for release during that Holy Week. And it actually seems to be quite controversial as a tradition, because there are questions around whether any kind of pardons at all are acceptable when the justice system has already decided someone's punishment. But regardless, she was put forward for it, and the application was unfortunately unsuccessful. But it just kind of makes you realize where she was sitting in the public sphere at this point. People wanted her to be free.
People in that backwards town? No. But majority of everyone else in the country was like, yes, Maria.
Yeah. Maria must have felt so vindicated, finally, by the recognition she was getting around the truth of her choices and the support she was receiving so willingly from the outside world. Veronica, who was about 24 years old at the time, would have been celebrating the change in response too. She was the only one who truly knew what herself and her mother had been through for the past decade. The guilt she may have felt, or the regret ever sharing details of her attack, must have weighed so heavily on Veronica until this point, knowing what it had led to and the struggles that they had faced in the wake of it all. Just imagining what a relief it would have been to finally see some support and understanding. Now, at some point amidst the outcry, medical records were revealed to the public, which indicated that Maria was experiencing depression and anxiety. These medical records seemed to kill two birds with one stone. They gave credence to Maria's insanity defense, and they indicated that Maria was suffering. She became a martyr-like figure, and the residents of Spain were eager to see her full release. Eventually, an application was placed for an official pardon, and in 2011, the court approved to suspend her sentence, pending the outcome of that application. So she was released from prison for that time. Her sentence was suspended, and she was out. The reasons provided for this were the facts that she had pleaded insanity as a defense, held no prior criminal record. Maria was reunited with her daughter Veronica, who had since moved to the beautiful Spanish city of Murcia. Maria lived there with Veronica following her release. And I just have to say, what a beautiful place it is to be in general, actually. It's an old city with gorgeous architecture and lots to do. I think it could have been the best idea to move there and be surrounded by beauty and distraction. Plus, being away from their hometown would have been so necessary and peaceful after everything they'd been through there. Unfortunately, though, the relief was relatively short-lived. A couple years later, in 2013, the pardon plea that had been made to the government was denied, leading to an overturn on her release conditions. So once again, Maria found herself in prison. In order to provide some level of protection to Maria, her lawyer made a plea to the courts for what's termed a stay on imprisonment. And this is usually done when seeking protection for prisoners from unfair or unfavorable decisions. And this provided some comfort at least. Her return to prison came as a devastating blow to the Garcias, as well as to the people of Spain, who at this point were very invested in Maria's freedom. After all, this case was speaking to a much larger question than whether Maria was guilty or not. The case seemed to be asking the country, who are we? What do we value? What do we stand against? It stirred up many feelings for people. It had become less of a murder case in the public and more of a moral mirror. Does the law protect our women and children, or do we have to do it ourselves? And if so, should we be punished for doing what the law could not do? So Maria was back in prison. Veronica once again had her mother ripped away from her, the one person who had believed her from the beginning, the one person who'd fought for her all these years and protected her, not just from local stares and rumors, but by ensuring her that her attacker could never harm her again. The days turned into weeks, months, years. 4 years later, in 2017, she was finally given day release herself, and she was allowed to leave prison between 11 a.m. and 7 p.m. daily. While this wasn't a perfect outcome, Maria continued to be afforded day release privileges into the following year in 2018, at which point, finally, she was granted full release. Of course, this was an amazing moment for Maria and Veronica, and the country was celebrating alongside them. Finally, the cries for her release and forgiveness were met with her freedom. But just reflecting on the time frame of all this, we've covered 2 decades here tonight. Antonio's offense took place in 1998, and Maria wouldn't be free of the legal fallout for another 2 decades in 2018. That is a huge amount of time to spend with this hanging over you. And I just think about Veronica being separated from her mother as well, who had truly been her lifeline throughout the years following her attack. To be separated from her, even just on and off, into her early and young adulthood would have been a whole different hurdle to overcome and such a burden. Now, while that's case closed when it comes to Maria del Carmen Garcia versus Antonio Cosme, I did mention earlier that the story sparked public conversation around sexual assault throughout the country. Back in the 90s and early 2000s, the concept of true consent wasn't something that most people were familiar with or taught. Often, girls and women in general were shamed for their experiences, whether wanted or not, and this culture, not just in Spain, but around the world, meant that harm was often done without recourse. Following this case tonight, I looked into any legal updates that have occurred since, and discovered that in 2022, a new law was introduced in Spain called the Only Yes Means Yes law, which places great emphasis on the need for clear consent, freely given. If this law had existed back in 1998, perhaps Veronica and Maria would have avoided much of the turmoil that they faced. Potentially not from their local community, but at least from the courts, which might have had cause to sentence Antonio more quickly and more stringently. And while it's no comfort to look back on what could have been, it is an important step forward in preventing or mitigating cases like this one. Also of note for anyone that is interested though, I did find that there was a documentary made about this case, which was released on, I think, HBO Max. It's titled Hell on Earth. I haven't had the opportunity to watch it myself, but for any interested listeners, I do encourage you to do your own research about these events and watch the documentary if you're able to, for a different insight into the case.
Well, I've actually never... This case is completely new to me, as usual. We try to do that. I think I might try to look at the documentary. I don't have HBO Max, so I might see if it's available anywhere else. But yeah, thanks for bringing that to us tonight, Fenella. I can see why you, at the start, you gave us a little bit of a warning, because obviously anything to do with kids, we like to warn people. Tricky one to... Well, not tricky, because I don't know. I'm a mum, so I'm just kind of like, go Maria. But,
I know.
you know...
It is a tough one, though, actually. You can definitely see her point of view.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mama Bear comes out with a petrol can.
Exactly. Tell us what you think about the case tonight, guys. Let us know, what would you have done in Maria's shoes? And can we truly know unless we're faced with a similar horror? If there's any cases in your local community that have changed the law, let us know. I'd be curious to find out.
There's lots of you and I have followed crime for a really long time, and there are cases that do influence the law, and new laws are created because of them. So, you know, if there is anything that anyone wants to share, we will pin that, or however we learn to do that, just to share it as well, because some of the things that are brought in after really horrible crimes are really important. So
yeah, and it's all about progress. So sometimes you don't know what you need in law until you find out.
Until it happens, unfortunately.
Yeah, which is horrible to say, but
it is. Well, let us know. We are a club here. We want you guys to get involved, and just be part of the team.
We're recruiting.
We don't have jackets yet, but
yet.
You know, yeah, maybe one day. Thanks for getting cozy with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review or share the club with a friend. You can join us on YouTube, Instagram, and Spotify, because here we leave the kettle on. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and stay cozy.